Shalom friends, welcome back to this week's installation of a Biselleh Torah. This week we come to the second parsha from the book of Shemot, that is the book of Exodus. Va'era is the name of the parsha. There are many aspects that are worthy of analysis. That's always the conundrum that we're facing every time we open up the Torah. There's too much to delve into to possibly cover every subject that arrests our eyes, our vision, and our mind. But I'd like to pluck out one thought. When Moses was at the burning bush and he asked for proof of God's power, in a sense, when he was to confront Pharaoh, God says, "What's in your hand?" Moshe responds, "A staff." "Throw down the staff," says God. He does, and it turns into a snake. He picks up the rod by the tail and turns back into a rod, back into a staff. Do you ever wonder why? I mean, of course, miracles do help one's argument. But why a snake? Why that particular magical act as opposed to something else? And yet again, this week, we find that Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, is in fact employing that act before Pharaoh to display God's power. And what happens? The Khartoumim, the magicians in the court of Pharaoh, replicate the same act. They throw down their staffs and they turn into snakes. So what's the big deal? One can almost imagine the court of Pharaoh snickering as Moses turns his rod into a snake, and then they replicate the same thing. What does all this have to do in common with each other? To make it even more complex, let me turn to the Talmud Masechet Berachot, where it talks about snakes, a different vantage point. If you're praying, if you're davening, and while you're davening, a snake, a poisonous snake, should curl around your ankle, what should you do? Should you look down, shake off the snake, stop your praying? What's more important, the snake or you? And particularly, your relationship to God. You're in the middle of praying. Should you break off prayer because the snake's curling itself around your ankle? That conundrum presents itself in the Talmud, and it has many different aspects that are appended to it. When can you break off prayer for the sake of saving your life? But it's the snake that I want to focus on yet again. What is a snake? A snake is something that we first meet in the Garden of Eden, when the snake acts as the Sitra Achra, the negative aspect of the world, to convince Eve, Chava, to eat of the forbidden fruit and then pass it on. What is it about a snake that is so wily? Well, we know one thing: it curls itself around. And in this curling around, it's suggestive that perhaps this is a deceptive mechanism that's built into the way that it lives, that it curls around much in the way that human beings can curl arguments around and create deception and lies and misdirection. So maybe it's really emblematic of that. Isn't that what the snake does in the Garden of Eden? And what about the snake that Moses conjures up because God tells him to at the burning bush? He holds it and it turns back into a staff. Something rather similar happens with Moses in the court of Pharaoh when they all produce snakes. After they produce their snakes, Moses takes a hold of his staff that was a snake, turns it into a staff, and then the staff swallows up the rest of the snakes. What does this mean? In the book of Kohelet, the book of Ecclesiastes, the first chapter, the 15th verse, it reads as follows: Me'uvat lo yuchal liton. That which is curved, that which is bent, cannot be made straight. We have to be very careful about what we say and about what other people say as well, to try to keep it straight, not curled around, not to be deceived by words, not to be misled by them, and at the same time, not to mislead by them as well. And maybe that's the moral of the snake, to not be like that. but rather to be straight, to be upfront, to be honest, to be full of integrity. Shabbat Shalom.